The Ashworth mansion wasn't just big. It was the kind of place that made you feel small the moment you walked through its doors. Marble floors stretched endlessly, reflecting the glow of chandeliers that cost more than most people's cars. Paintings worth hundreds of thousands hung on walls like they were nothing special. Everything about the place screamed money, old money, the kind that had been around for generations. It was a Friday evening, and 17-year-old Preston Ashworth was doing what he did every Friday. Throwing a party, well, not really a party, more like a gathering of the chosen few, kids from his prep school, each one wearing clothes that could feed a family for a month. They lounged on velvet sofas, laughed too loud at jokes that weren't funny, and posted pictures on their phones to make sure everyone knew where they were. Preston stood by the window, swirling expensive juice in a crystal glass like he'd seen his father do with wine. He had that look about him, the kind that came naturally to people who'd never heard the word no. Sharp jawline, perfectly styled hair, and a smile that could turn cold in an instant. He was good at that smile. It got him what he wanted. His girlfriend Sloane sat nearby, scrolling through her phone with manicured nails that clicked against the screen. Around them, 15 other teenagers filled the parlor, all of them comfortable in this world of excess. None of them noticed the woman moving quietly through the next room, picking up their discarded cups and straightening cushions they'd carelessly tossed aside. That was the point, really. People like Rosa Santos were meant to be invisible. Rosa had been the Ashworth family's housekeeper for 3 years now. She knew every corner of this massive house, every surface that needed dusting, every spot where the family dropped their expensive things without a second thought. She moved through her work with practiced silence, the kind you develop when your job depends on not being noticed. Tonight was supposed to be her day off, but her sister had called that afternoon, voice tight with pain. Food poisoning. Bad enough that she couldn't watch Rosa's son like they'd planned. Rosa had no choice but to bring 12-year-old Daniel with her. She'd been firm with him before they arrived. Stay in the kitchen. Don't touch anything. Don't make noise. Be invisible like her. Daniel had nodded, understanding without needing more explanation. He was good at being invisible, too. The boy sat at the small table in the kitchen, swinging his legs and trying not to be bored. He could hear music and laughter drifting from the front of the house. His mother had given him his homework to do, but his pencil lay forgotten on his notebook. His attention kept drifting to the sounds coming from deeper in the mansion. Daniel had been in this house before, many times, but always stuck in the back areas where the help belonged. He knew there was a piano somewhere in one of those fancy rooms. He'd glimpsed it once months ago, when his mother had to quickly grab something from the parlor. It was huge and black and beautiful, the kind of piano he'd only ever seen in videos online. He loved music more than almost anything. At home, in their small apartment across town, he had an old keyboard his mother had bought at a thrift store for $20. Half the keys stuck and it didn't sound quite right, but Daniel didn't care. He'd taught himself to play on that keyboard, spending hours watching free videos on the library computer, learning songs by ear, feeling the music in a way he couldn't explain. But he never talked about it. Boys like him, from neighborhoods like his, didn't talk about playing classical piano. That was for rich kids with private tutors and recitals in fancy halls. Preston was getting bored. He could feel it, that restless energy that came when everything was too easy, too predictable. His friends were boring him. The same conversations, the same jokes, the same everything. He wanted something new, something entertaining. That's when he decided to go to the kitchen for more ice. He could have asked Rosa to bring it, but he was restless, needed to move. He pushed through the swinging door and stopped short when he saw the boy at the table. Daniel looked up, startled. For a second, their eyes met. Two boys, same city, completely different worlds. Preston's mind worked quickly. He'd seen this kid before, realized this must be the housekeeper's son, and suddenly an idea formed. A terrible, perfect idea. His boredom evaporated, replaced by something sharper. "Hey," Preston said, all friendly charm. "You're Rosa's kid, right?" Daniel nodded slowly, unsure where this was going. "You ever seen the piano in the parlor?" Preston asked, leaning against the counter like they were old friends. Daniel's eyes lit up before he could stop himself. He nodded again. "You play?" This time Daniel hesitated. Did he play? Not really. Not properly. Just messing around at home on a broken keyboard, teaching himself from free videos. But something in him wanted to say yes. Wanted to not be invisible for once. A little, he said quietly. Preston's smile widened. Perfect. Come on then. Come show my friends what you got. Every instinct in Daniel's body told him this was wrong. His mother had said to stay in the kitchen. Stay quiet. Stay out of sight. But Preston was already walking back toward the party, looking over his shoulder expectantly. And there was something in the older boy's voice. Some invitation that Daniel had never received before. Someone actually wanted to hear him play. He stood up and followed. Rosa came around the corner just in time to see her son disappearing through the parlor door. Her heart dropped into her stomach. She rushed after them, but by the time she reached the doorway, it was too late. Preston stood in the center of the room, arm around Daniel's shoulders like they were best friends. Everyone, check this out. Rosa's son here says he plays piano. Let's give him a shot, yeah? The room went quiet. Heads turned. Phones came out. Sloane sat up straighter, that mean little smile playing at her lips. They all knew what this was. Entertainment. The kind that came at someone else's expense. Daniel stood frozen, suddenly aware of everything wrong about this moment. His sneakers were old, the soles worn down. His jeans came from the donation bin at school. His shirt was clean but faded from too many washes. Everyone in this room was looking at him, and he could see it in their eyes. They thought this would be funny. They thought he'd make a fool of himself. His mother appeared in the doorway, her face pale. Daniel, she said softly, but she didn't finish. What could she say? Oh, don't play? That would be worse, admitting defeat before he'd even tried. Preston guided him toward the piano. It was massive up close, gleaming black, every key perfect and white. Daniel had never touched anything so expensive in his life. His hands were shaking. Go ahead, Preston said, stepping back with that smile. Show us what you got. Someone snickered. A phone camera light blinked on. Daniel looked back at his mother one more time. She looked terrified, but she gave him the smallest nod. Whatever happened next, she was with him. Daniel turned back to the piano. His fingers touched the keys, and despite everything, despite the fear in the eyes and the phones, something settled inside him. These keys felt different than his broken keyboard at home. They felt right. He closed his eyes, took a breath, and began to play. The first note hung in the air like a question. Then came the second and the third, and suddenly the room was filling with music that nobody expected. Daniel didn't sit down. He couldn't. His legs were shaking too much, so he stood at the piano, his small hands reaching across keys that felt smooth and perfect under his fingers. This wasn't like his keyboard at home. These keys responded to the lightest touch. They sang. He'd chosen a piece he'd listened to 1,000 times on his cheap headphones. Something he'd taught himself late at night when his mother worked her second job, and the apartment was quiet. He didn't know it was called Nocturne in E-flat major by some composer named Chopin. He just knew it as the sad, beautiful song that made him feel less alone. The melody poured out of him. It wasn't perfect. His fingers sometimes rushed ahead of where they should be. A few notes came out wrong, his reach not quite long enough for some of the chords. But there was something in his playing that technical perfection couldn't touch. He played like someone who'd lived inside this music, who'd felt every note in his chest during long, lonely nights. Preston's smile started to slip. This wasn't what was supposed to happen. The kid was supposed to fumble, to embarrass himself, to give everyone a good laugh. But the laughter had died. The smirking had stopped. One by one, the phones lowered. Sloane's mouth hung slightly open. She'd been ready to record something hilarious, something they could all laugh about later in their group chat. But she found herself actually listening. The music was doing something strange to the room, making everything feel different, smaller, quieter, real. A girl named Beth, who'd been to dozens of piano recitals at Lincoln Center because her parents made her go, felt tears prickling at her eyes. She didn't understand why. She'd heard better playing, technically speaking, but she'd never heard anything that felt like this. Raw and honest and breaking your heart without trying to. Daniel kept his eyes closed. If he opened them, he'd remember where he was. He'd remember the kids watching him, judging him, waiting for him to fail. So he stayed in the music, in that place where he always went when he played. A place where it didn't matter that his shoes were falling apart or that his mother cleaned houses or that he'd never fit into a world like this. Rosa stood in the doorway, her hand pressed against her mouth. She'd known her son played that old keyboard at home. She'd heard the sounds coming from his room. But she'd been working, always working, and hadn't really listened. Not like this. She hadn't known he could do this, that he had this inside him. Tears ran down her face. Pride and terror mixed together in her chest. Pride because her baby was making something beautiful. Terror because she knew in that moment that everything was about to change. You couldn't put this back in a box. You couldn't make this invisible. The music built and fell, whispered and soared. Daniel's whole body moved with it, swaying slightly, lost in something bigger than himself. The expensive Persian rug under his feet didn't matter. The crystal chandelier above his head didn't matter. Nothing mattered except the conversation his hands were having with the piano. In the entrance hall, someone else had arrived. The front door had opened quietly during the music. An older man stood there, his coat half off, completely frozen by what he was hearing. Viktor Volkov had been conducting orchestras for over 40 years. He'd worked with the greatest musicians in the world. He'd heard child prodigies from Moscow to Tokyo, kids who'd been training since they were 3 years old with the best teachers money could buy. He knew what excellence sounded like. This wasn't excellence. Not technically, but it was something else, something he hadn't heard in years. It was pure, hungry, alive. This was someone who played because they had to, because the music was bigger than them and had to come out somehow. He moved toward the sound like a man in a dream. His trained ear caught everything. The self-taught technique, the occasional wrong note, the way the boy stood instead of sitting. He could see all the flaws, but he could also see the gift, blazing through those flaws like light through cracks. The song moved toward its ending. Daniel's hands slowed, the notes growing softer, more delicate. The final chord hung in the air, then faded into silence. Nobody moved. The quiet was so complete you could hear breathing. Daniel's hands stayed on the keys, trembling now. Slowly, terribly slowly, he opened his eyes. The room swam into focus. All those faces staring at him. He'd done something wrong. He must have. The silence felt huge and awful. He'd embarrassed his mother. He'd made a mistake coming in here, touching their expensive piano with his rough hands. He wanted to run. Then he saw his mother's face. She was crying. Not sad crying, but something else. Something that made his chest feel tight. "Who taught you?" The voice came from the doorway. Accented, deep, serious, everyone turned. An older man stood there, someone Daniel didn't recognize. He had silver hair and sharp eyes and wore an expensive suit. He looked at Daniel like he was seeing something important. Daniel's mouth went dry. "Nobody," he whispered, "nobody." The man walked into the room. Everyone seemed to shrink back a little, like this person commanded respect without asking for it. "You learned this from nobody?" Rosa found her voice. "He teaches himself. From the internet. Free videos. We have an old keyboard at home." The man's eyebrows rose. He looked at Daniel again, studying him. "Play something else." "Victor, I didn't know you'd arrived." Preston's father appeared from somewhere, looking nervous. "We were just—" "Quiet, please," Victor said without looking at him. "Boy, play something else. Something different." Daniel looked at his mother. She nodded, even though her face was still wet with tears. He turned back to the piano. His hands were shaking harder now, but he placed them on the keys. This time he played something faster, something he'd learned from a video of a movie soundtrack. His fingers flew across the keys, and yes, he hit wrong notes, and yes, his timing wasn't perfect. But the music poured out of him like water, like he couldn't stop it if he tried. When he finished, Victor was smiling. It was a small smile, but it was real. "What is your name?" "Daniel, sir, Daniel." "How old are you?" 12. 12. Victor looked at Rosa. "You are his mother?" "Yes, sir. I work here. I'm the housekeeper." "I'm sorry if we—" "Don't apologize." Victor cut her off gently. "How long has he been playing?" 2 years, maybe? He saved up his birthday money and we bought a keyboard from the second-hand store. He just plays all the time. I didn't know he was this. I didn't know." Victor nodded slowly like something was settling in his mind. He pulled a card from his jacket pocket and handed it to Rosa. "I am the conductor of the New York Philharmonic. I also teach privately. Very rarely. Very few students." He looked back at Daniel. "I would like to teach your son, no charge. If you will allow it." The room erupted. Everyone started talking at once. Preston stood frozen, his face red. This wasn't how this was supposed to go. Not at all. Rosa stared at the card in her hand like it might disappear. I don't understand. Your son has a gift, Victor said simply. A real gift. It would be a crime to waste it. We will talk details later, but I wanted you to know now in this moment. He is extraordinary. Daniel couldn't breathe. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to kids like him. His mother cleaned houses. They lived in a tiny apartment where he could hear every word the neighbors said through thin walls. He wasn't extraordinary. He was just a kid with a broken keyboard who loved music. But the old man's eyes were serious and kind, and he wasn't joking. This was real. Everything was about to change. The week after that Friday night felt like a dream Rosa kept waiting to wake up from. Viktor Volkov had called 3 times. 3 times. Each time she almost didn't answer because she couldn't believe this was really happening. But it was happening. Victor wanted to start lessons immediately. 3 times a week, he said, after school. His studio was in Midtown and he'd arranged everything. Daniel could come straight there and Victor would make sure he got home safely afterward. Rosa had said yes because how could she say no? But now, sitting in the break room of the Ashworth mansion on Tuesday morning, reality was settling in like a weight on her chest. She was pouring coffee for herself when Mrs. Ashworth walked in. Evelyn Ashworth didn't usually come to the break room. That's what made Rosa's hands freeze on the coffee pot. The older woman stood in the doorway, perfectly dressed as always, her expression pleasant but cold in that way rich people had mastered. Rosa, do you have a moment? It wasn't really a question. Rosa set down the coffee pot and turned, keeping her face neutral the way she'd learned to do. Yes, Mrs. Ashworth. Let's sit. Evelyn gestured to the small table. They both sat and the silence stretched out for a moment. I wanted to talk to you about this whole situation with Daniel. Rosa's stomach tightened. Here it comes, she thought. It's wonderful, really, Evelyn continued, examining her perfectly manicured nails. Such an opportunity for him. Viktor Volkov is quite prestigious. I'm sure you're very proud. I am, Rosa said quietly. Of course. Evelyn smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. The thing is, Rosa, I have to think about what's best for my family. For Preston, you understand. Rosa understood perfectly, but she stayed quiet. Having my housekeeper's son become, well, famous, potentially, it creates a certain awkwardness. People talk. They make connections. The press can be so invasive these days. Evelyn folded her hands on the table. I'm not saying you've done anything wrong, but I think it might be best if we made some changes. For everyone's comfort, there it was. Rosa had been expecting this since Saturday morning, but hearing it still hurt. You're letting me go. I'm giving you time to make the best choice for your family, Evelyn corrected, her voice smooth as silk. You could stay, of course, but then Daniel would have to decline Victor's offer. I'm sure you could find him another teacher eventually, or... She paused delicately. You could pursue this opportunity for Daniel, and I would provide you with an excellent reference for your next position. A generous severance. 2 months' pay. Rosa felt something cold spreading through her chest. 2 months' pay. It sounded like a lot until you thought about rent, utilities, food, the cost of finding a new job, and all of it would be gone while she was taking Daniel to lessons 3 times a week instead of working. How long do I have to decide? Rosa asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Let's say by Friday. That gives you a few days to think it over. Evelyn stood up, smoothing her skirt. I really do hope Daniel succeeds, Rosa. He seems like a sweet boy. I just have to protect my own family first. I'm sure you understand. After she left, Rosa sat alone in the break room for a long time. She thought about calling her sister, but what would she say? She thought about calling Victor and telling him it was impossible, but the memory of Daniel's face when he played stopped her. That night, Daniel came home from his first real lesson glowing. He burst through the apartment door talking a mile a minute, his words tumbling over each other. Mama, the piano in his studio is incredible, and he showed me how I've been holding my wrists wrong, but he said I have good instincts, really good instincts. And he has all these books, Mama, shelves and shelves of music books, and he said I could borrow whatever I wanted. And there's this concert coming up. He said maybe if I work hard enough I could play in it. Can you believe that? An actual concert. Rosa watched her son's face so bright with joy and felt her heart breaking. She made dinner, listened to him talk, helped him with homework. She waited until he was in bed, the apartment finally quiet, before she let herself cry. She cried quietly, sitting at their small kitchen table, looking at the bills stacked there. The rent was due in 2 weeks. Her sister had helped her before, but couldn't anymore. Her brother was struggling with his own family. She had some savings, but not much. Never much. 2 months severance would help. But after that, how long would it take to find another job that paid as well? And what job would let her leave 3 times a week to take Daniel to lessons? But if she stayed at the Ashworths, if she made Daniel give this up, would he ever forgive her? Would she ever forgive herself? Daniel appeared in the doorway, his pajamas rumpled, his hair sticking up. "Mama, why are you crying?" She wiped her eyes quickly. "Come here, baby." He climbed into her lap even though he was getting too big for it. She held him tight, breathing in the smell of his shampoo. "I need to tell you something," she said softly. "Mrs. Ashworth talked to me today." She felt him go still in her arms. "Kids always knew when something was wrong. She doesn't want me to work there anymore if you keep taking lessons with Mr. Volkov." Daniel pulled back to look at her face.
"What? Why?"
Because people like us aren't supposed to have opportunities like this. It makes them uncomfortable." The bitterness leaked into her voice before she could stop it. "Then I won't do it." Daniel said it immediately, firmly. "I'll tell Mr. Volkov I can't. It's okay, Mama, I don't need lessons." Rosa's heart squeezed. Of course that's what he would say. Her beautiful, selfless boy. "Daniel, I mean it. That piano at home is fine. I can keep learning from videos. It's not a big deal." "It is a big deal." Rosa cupped his face in her hands. "Baby, you are so talented. Mr. Volkov, he's one of the most important music teachers in the world, and he thinks you're special. That doesn't happen. That almost never happens. But you need your job. I need you to be happy more than I need that job." The words came out before she'd fully decided, but once she said them, she knew they were true. "Your father, he was a musician. Did I ever tell you that?" Daniel shook his head. "He played guitar. He was so good, Daniel. Magic in his hands, just like you. But he never got the chance. We were poor and there was no one to help, and life it took that dream away from him." Her voice caught. "Before he died, he made me promise something. He said if we ever had children, if they had a gift, I had to let them chase it, even if it was scary, even if it was hard." Tears ran down Daniel's cheeks now. "I don't remember him. I know. But he would be so proud of you right now. So proud." Rosa wiped his tears with her thumbs. "Some doors only open once in life, and when they open, you have to walk through them, even when you're scared. Maybe especially when you're scared. But what are we going to do? How will we pay rent?" Rosa didn't have an answer to that. Not a good one. She just held her son and tried to sound more confident than she felt. "We'll figure it out. We always do." But that night, after Daniel finally went back to bed, Rosa sat up making calculations on paper. 2 months severance plus her savings would cover 3 months, maybe 4 if they were careful. She could pick up cleaning jobs that paid under the table, work weekends. Maybe her sister could watch Daniel on lesson days. It would be tight. It would be terrifying, but it might just barely be possible. On Friday morning, Rosa walked into Evelyn Ashworth's office with her head held high. "I've made my decision," she said. "Daniel is going to continue his lessons." Evelyn nodded like she'd expected this. "I'll have your severance check ready by the end of the day. You can finish out the week." Rosa cleaned the Ashworth mansion for the last time, making sure everything was perfect. Some small, petty part of her wanted to do a bad job, to leave something undone, but that wasn't who she was. On her last day, she didn't see Preston. He'd been avoiding her all week. But as she was leaving, she saw him watching from an upstairs window. Their eyes met for a moment. Then he turned away. Rosa walked out of that mansion and didn't look back. Her hands were shaking, but she was smiling. Terrified, but smiling. She'd just gambled everything on her son's dream. Now all she could do was hope that dreams were worth the price you paid for them. 3 months later, Rosa's alarm went off at 4:30 in the morning. It was still dark outside. She lay there for a moment, every muscle in her body aching before forcing herself to sit up. This was her life now. Up before dawn to clean office buildings downtown before most people arrived at work. Then a quick subway ride to the Upper West Side, where she cleaned 2 apartments back to back. If she was lucky, she'd have an hour to rest before Daniel got home from school. Then it was time to take him to his lesson with Victor. Wait in the lobby doing paperwork for her weekend cleaning jobs. and bring him home. After dinner and homework, she'd collapse into bed, only to do it all again the next day. The severance money was gone. Her savings were almost gone. She'd picked up every odd job she could find, but it was never quite enough. Last week, she'd been short on the electric bill. This week, she wasn't sure how she'd make rent, but Daniel was thriving. That was what mattered. That was what she told herself every morning when her back screamed and her hands were raw from cleaning chemicals. She got ready in the dark, careful not to wake Daniel. But when she came out of the bathroom, he was sitting at their tiny kitchen table, already dressed for school. "Baby, you should sleep more," she said, kissing the top of his head. "I wanted to see you before you left." He'd made toast, even poured her coffee. Her 12-year-old son was taking care of her because he knew how hard she was working. They ate breakfast together in comfortable silence. Rosa noticed his jeans were getting short on him. Growing boy. She'd need to find him new ones soon, but the thrift store would have to do. Everything had to be thrift store now. "Mama," Daniel said quietly, "Mr. Volkov wants to talk to you today." After my lesson, Rosa's stomach dropped. Did he say why? No, but he seemed serious. All day, that conversation hung over Rosa's head like a storm cloud. What if Victor was giving up on Daniel? What if this whole thing had been for nothing? She'd lost her job, drained her savings, worked herself to exhaustion, and maybe it wasn't enough. Maybe Daniel wasn't progressing fast enough. Maybe she'd gambled everything and lost. By the time she got to Victor's studio that afternoon, she'd convinced herself of the worst. She sat in the lobby, her leg bouncing nervously, listening to the muffled sound of piano music from inside. Daniel was playing something complicated, something she didn't recognize. At least he sounded good. That was something. Finally, the door opened. Victor stood there, his silver hair perfectly combed, his expression unreadable. "Rosa, please come in." She walked into the studio on shaking legs. Daniel sat at the piano, looking between them nervously. The room was beautiful, all dark wood and tall windows with a grand piano that probably cost more than Rosa would make in 5 years. "Sit, please." Victor gestured to a chair. He remained standing, his hands clasped behind his back. "I wanted to speak with you about Daniel's progress." "Here it comes," Rosa thought. She gripped the arms of the chair. "He is remarkable," Victor said. "In 3 months, he has learned what takes most students a year. His dedication is unlike anything I have seen in a very long time. His talent is undeniable." He paused. "But there is a problem." Rosa's heart sank. "The problem is that I am limited in what I can do for him. He needs more than just lessons. He needs opportunities to perform, to be seen by the right people. He needs to attend masterclasses, competitions. These things cost money." Victor looked at her directly. "And I know you do not have money." Rosa felt her face burn with shame. "I'm working as much as I can. I just need a little more time to get on my feet. Please let me finish." Victor's voice was gentle but firm. "I have been making phone calls, pulling strings, as they say, and I have arranged something." He walked to his desk and picked up an envelope. "The New York Philharmonic has an administrative office. They need a coordinator for their youth education programs, scheduling, paperwork, communication with schools. The hours are Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. It pays well, better than housekeeping." He held out the envelope. "If you want it, the job is yours." Rosa stared at him. I don't understand. I told them about you. About Daniel. About what you have sacrificed." Victor's stern expression softened slightly. "They were moved by your story. And they need someone reliable. Someone who understands what these programs mean to young people. I recommended you. They would like you to start next week." Rosa took the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a letter O, offering her the position, with a salary that made her eyes blur with tears. It was more than she'd made at the Ashworths. And the hours meant she could take Daniel to his lessons without juggling 3 jobs. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say you will take it," Victor said simply, "because there is more. Daniel, come here." Daniel jumped up from the piano bench and came to stand beside his mother. Victor looked down at the boy with something like fondness in his usually serious eyes. "There is a youth showcase at Carnegie Hall in 2 months. It is very prestigious. Students compete for spots by audition. I have entered Daniel in the audition." He looked at Rosa. "With your permission, of course. Carnegie Hall." Rosa had walked past it 1,000 times, but never imagined going inside, never imagined her son playing on that stage. What if he doesn't make it? She asked. Always practical, always preparing for disappointment. He will make it, Victor said with absolute certainty. I do not waste my time on students who will not make it. Daniel has something special. The audition is a formality. They need to hear him, but I already know what they will say. Daniel looked up at his mother, his eyes huge with hope and fear. Can I do it, Mama? Rosa pulled him close. This boy who'd inherited his father's gift, who practiced until his fingers hurt, who never complained even when he saw how tired she was. Of course you can do it. That night Rosa called her sister to share the news. She cried while she talked, relief and joy and exhaustion all pouring out at once. A real job, normal hours, benefits, a chance to breathe. But in the back of her mind a small worry lingered. Carnegie Hall, that was public. That was press. That was exactly what Evelyn Ashworth had wanted to avoid. Rosa pushed the thought away. The Ashworths had made their choice. She'd made hers. That chapter was over, except it wasn't. Not quite. 2 weeks later, Daniel had his audition. Rosa took the morning off from her new job, which she'd just started and already loved. The audition was in a small rehearsal room at Carnegie Hall. 3 judges sat at a table with clipboards. They looked bored at first, like they'd heard 100 kids that day. Daniel played the piece Victor had prepared him for. A complicated work by Rachmaninoff that seemed impossible for someone so young. But Daniel played it like he'd been born to it, his small hands stretching across keys, his whole body moving with the music. The judges stopped looking bored. They sat forward. They glanced at each other. When Daniel finished, there was a long silence. Who is your teacher? One of them asked. Victor Volkov, Daniel said quietly. That explained it, their faces seemed to say. Victor Volkov's students were always good, but even for one of his students, this was exceptional. You're in, the head judge said, making a note on his clipboard. We'll be in touch with the details, just like that. 3 months ago, Daniel had been invisible. The kid whose mother cleaned houses. Now he was going to play at Carnegie Hall. When they left the audition, Rosa and Daniel walked through the grand lobby of Carnegie Hall. Rosa looked up at the high ceilings, the elegant stairs, the posters of famous performers. In 2 months, Daniel's name would be on a program here. Her son, her beautiful, talented son. Mama, Daniel said, squeezing her hand. Is this really happening? Yes, baby. It's really happening. What she didn't know was that someone had been at that audition, not in the room, but watching from the hallway through the small window in the door. Someone who'd heard about the audition through connections, who'd come to see for himself. Preston Ashworth stood there for a long time after Rosa and Daniel left. His hands in his pockets, his expression troubled. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call. Mom, he said when she answered, we need to talk about something. The machine he'd set in motion 3 months ago wasn't done yet, but maybe, just maybe, he could still change what it became. The night of the Carnegie Hall performance arrived with spring rain tapping against the windows. Rosa stood in their small bathroom, trying to fix her hair in the cracked mirror. She'd bought a dress from the thrift store for tonight. Nothing fancy but clean and presentable. She wanted to look like she belonged in that concert hall, even if she didn't feel like it. In the living room, Daniel sat on the couch in his one good outfit, his leg bouncing nervously. Victor had arranged for proper concert clothes for him, black pants and a white shirt that actually fit. He looked older somehow, not like her little boy anymore. You're going to be amazing, Rosa said, coming out of the bathroom. What if I mess up? What if I freeze? What if my hands shake too much and I can't play? The words tumbled out in a rush. Rosa sat beside him and took his hands in hers. They were cold. Then you'll take a breath and keep playing. Mistakes happen, but you know this music. You've played it 100 times. Your hands know what to do even when your brain is scared. Mr. Volkov says there will be important people there. Music critics. People from schools. People who could change my whole life. Then let them see what I see every day, Rosa said softly. Let them see how much you love this. That's all you need to do. Just play the way you play at home, when it's just you and the piano and nothing else matters. They took the subway to Carnegie Hall, Daniel clutching his sheet music even though he had it memorized. The rain had stopped, leaving the city streets gleaming under streetlights. As they walked up to the entrance, Rosa's heart pounded. She'd walked past this building so many times but never imagined going inside. Never imagined her son would perform here. The lobby was crowded with people in expensive clothes. Rosa felt suddenly small in her thrift store dress. But then Victor appeared, cutting through the crowd like it was nothing. "There you are," he said, his hand on Daniel's shoulder. "Come, I will take you backstage. Rosa, your seat is in the 5th row. An usher will show you." Daniel looked back at his mother, his eyes wide with fear. She smiled at him, trying to look confident even though she was terrified too. "Go on, baby. I'll be right there watching." An usher in a neat uniform led Rosa to her seat, 5th row center, close enough to see everything. The seat next to her was empty and she was grateful. She didn't want to make small talk with strangers. Not tonight. The theater was beautiful. Red velvet seats rose up in rows to the ceiling. A massive chandelier hung above. The stage looked huge and empty. Just a piano sitting there alone under lights. In a few minutes, her son would walk out onto that stage. Her son, who 3 months ago had been invisible. People filed in, the seats filling up. Rosa heard conversations around her. People talking about their children in the show. About other concerts they'd been to. About summer plans and private schools. She didn't belong in these conversations, so she stayed quiet, her hands folded in her lap. The lights dimmed. Rosa's heart jumped into her throat. A woman walked onto the stage to introduce the showcase, explaining that these were young musicians chosen from hundreds of applicants. Each one exceptional. Each one representing the future of classical music. The performances began. A 14-year-old violinist. A 16-year-old cellist. Each one technically perfect, playing complicated pieces without mistakes. The audience clapped politely after each performance. Rosa barely heard them. She was counting down to Daniel. Then the woman returned to the stage. "Our next performer is our youngest musician tonight. At 12 years old, Daniel Santos has been studying piano for only 3 months with Maestro Victor Volkov. He will perform Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, second movement." Rosa's hands gripped the armrests. 3 months. They'd said 3 months out loud, and she heard murmurs around her. People were surprised, skeptical. How good could someone be after only 3 months? Daniel walked onto the stage. He looked so small up there, so young. The lights were bright on him, and Rosa could see his hands trembling. He walked to the piano, stood there for a moment, then sat down. The silence stretched out. Daniel's hands hovered over the keys. "Come on, baby," Rosa thought. "You can do this." Then he began to play. The first notes were soft, almost hesitant. But then they grew stronger. The music poured out of him, and it was like the world fell away. This wasn't technical perfection like the other performers. This was something else. This was raw and honest and so beautiful it hurt. Rosa felt tears streaming down her face. She didn't bother wiping them away. Around her, people had stopped whispering. They'd stopped moving. Everyone was listening, really listening, to this 12-year-old boy playing his heart out on that stage. Daniel's whole body moved with the music. He swayed, his eyes closed, lost in something bigger than himself. Sometimes his fingers rushed ahead. Once or twice he hit a wrong note. But none of it mattered because the emotion was so pure, so real. He wasn't showing off. He was sharing something precious, something that had lived inside him for years with no way to come out until now. The music built and built, Daniel's hands flying across the keys. Then it softened, became gentle, almost like a lullaby. The final notes hung in the air, sweet and sad and perfect. Silence, complete silence. Daniel opened his eyes, looking startled, like he'd forgotten where he was. Then the applause started. Not polite clapping like before. Real applause, loud and long. People stood up. A standing ovation for a 12-year-old who'd been playing for 3 months. Rosa stood too, sobbing openly now, watching her son take a shy bow. That's when she noticed the person standing in the aisle next to her seat. Preston Ashworth stood there, also clapping, his face wet with tears. Their eyes met. Rosa didn't know what to feel. Anger? Confusion? This was the boy who'd invited Daniel to play as a joke, who'd set all of this in motion. Preston stopped clapping and leaned closer to speak over the noise. "I'm sorry," he said.
"For everything."
"For what my mother did. For what I did." The applause continued. Daniel was leaving the stage now, looking dazed and happy. Rosa looked at Preston, this rich kid who'd had everything handed to him, and saw something different in his face. Shame, maybe, but also something else. Understanding, perhaps, thank you, she said quietly. For what? For that night. For asking him to play. None of this would have happened if you hadn't. Preston shook his head. I was trying to humiliate him, I know. But sometimes the worst things lead to the best things. Rosa smiled through her tears. Sometimes cruelty opens a door that kindness never would have. After the show, backstage was chaos. People wanted to talk to Daniel, to Victor, to take photos. A woman from Juilliard's pre-college program gave Rosa her card. A man from a music foundation asked about scholarships. Victor stood to the side, smiling his small smile, looking satisfied. Daniel finally broke free from the crowd and ran to his mother. She caught him in a hug, holding him tight. You were perfect, she whispered. So perfect. I hit wrong notes, he said into her shoulder. I don't care. You were perfect. Later, as they were leaving, Rosa saw an envelope on the seat next to where she'd been sitting, the empty seat. Inside was a check, made out to the New York Youth Musicians Foundation. The amount made her gasp. $20,000. Enough to fund scholarships for 10 young musicians from low-income families. The note with it was simple. For those brave enough to play. It was unsigned, but Rosa knew. She looked around the lobby, but Preston was already gone. She folded the note carefully and put it in her purse. On the subway ride home, Daniel fell asleep against her shoulder, exhausted from adrenaline and relief. Rosa looked at his face, peaceful now, and thought about the journey that had brought them here. The mansion where she'd cleaned floors. The night Preston had asked Daniel to play. The choice to lose her job. The struggle to survive. And now this moment of triumph. She thought about Preston, too. That boy was learning something his money couldn't buy. That greatness didn't care about your address or your last name or your parents' bank account. It only cared that you were brave enough to let it out. Daniel stirred and mumbled something in his sleep. Rosa kissed his forehead and smiled. They still lived in a tiny apartment. She still worked hard every day. Life was still difficult in 100 ways. But her son had found his voice, his gift, his place in the world. And maybe that rich kid in the mansion had learned something about his... Some jokes became truth. Some cruelty opened doors. And sometimes, when a 12-year-old boy played piano in a mansion full of strangers, it changed everyone in that room. Not just the boy, everyone. The music had silenced them all. But more than that, it had woken something up. Something that had been sleeping. And that, Rosa thought, was worth every sacrifice she'd made. That was worth everything.